It's really, oh, perfect. It's really important that our emerging leaders have, as much information as possible, especially coming up in property management. You have to manage multiple different projects, work with different vendors. So anything that we can do to share our expertise and our knowledge on elevators, that's really what today is about. So we'll start off here with just an overview of how this presentation is going to go. And then we'll go to introductions and then we'll get started. So just so everyone is aware, we'll start off with the intros. We'll go through the types of elevators, and then we're going to go into the modernization cycle. So starting with the survey, a specification, bid packages, interviews, awards and next steps, scheduling, permits, intros, ownership involvement, and then we'll end the presentation with questions and answers. All right. So Nick, if you don't mind introducing yourself first, please.
Thank you, Amber. Nick Montesano, CEO and President, DTM Elevator Consultants and Drafting Services. We're 42 years in business, family owned and still family run.
Perfect. Thank you. And my name is Amber Robbins. I am a fellow emerging leaders, so I do know a good amount of the participants today, but I do work for Nuvo Elevator. We are also a family-owned elevator company based out of New York, and we are 38 years in the business, so DTM has us beat by a few years. All right. So first and foremost, we'll get started with the types of elevators, since that's the type of vertical transportation we're focusing on today. So first and foremost, we'll talk about traction elevators. Most buildings in Manhattan are going to have this type of equipment. So traction elevators, here's an example to the right. I'm a very visual learner, so I usually like to lead this way. This is what an elevator looks like in the shaftway. You have your machine room above the top landing here, and then here you have your motor, you have your controller system, which has your hoist cables, which runs the elevator up and down the shaftway, and then you have your counterweight balancing out that weight. Traction elevators, like I mentioned, are very popular in New York, as they're typically going to be in buildings that are above 6 stories. These type of elevators can go faster, which is important if you are serving a high-rise building. You want to make sure that your elevators can hold more weight and that they can operate at a safe and fast speed. So we've got 2 types of traction elevators. First one is a geared traction elevator. This can typically travel up to 500 feet per minute with a maximum travel distance of 250 feet. And then you have a gearless traction elevator. Now, when you're going into a modernization, most of the time, you're moving in the direction of replacing that geared equipment with gearless traction elevator equipment. These can move as fast as 2,000 feet per minute with a maximum travel distance of 2,000 feet. And then they typically have lower weight capacity to compensate for the distance and speed at which they travel. And then from there, we'll move to hydraulic elevators. So the traction elevators are typically serving anything above 6 stories and higher. But the sweet spot here with the hydraulic elevators is going to be anything between 2 to 6 story buildings. There are 3 types of hydraulic elevators. We have a roped hydraulic elevator, conventional hydraulic elevator, and a holeless hydraulic elevator. So pretty similar to how we saw the previous description. We have the elevator shaftway, we have the cab that you or your tenants would be operating in, but this is everything that goes on behind the scenes. This is an example here of an in-ground cylinder. So that means that the depth of the cylinder is equal to the height of the elevator travel. One of the main things that makes the hydraulic elevators different is that they're being operated by the hydraulic fluid. And here in New York, we have multiple different seasons. So it's very important that you are monitoring in the colder months that the hydraulic fluid is not getting gummy. And then in the warmer months that it's not getting too thin. So that's something to look out for with your current elevator provider. But these also, with the hydraulic fluid, can have sometimes potential environmental hazards. So again, we typically move into the direction of traction elevators, but hydros you will typically see in like parking garages. And again, any buildings that are below serving 6 stories. And then the third type of elevator today, we have MRLs, which mean machine roomless elevators. So the traction elevators, we have the machine rooms above the top landing. So if you have a low-rise bank, a mid-rise bank, and a high-rise bank, those machine rooms will be located above the top landing of those banks. Now, if you have a building where an architect would rather have be able to rent out a penthouse instead of having a elevator machine room take up any space, they will try to push for this type of design because you do not have to have a elevator machine room for this one. This one, the one that differentiates it is that the motor is actually going to be either above or below that elevator cab that you walk into. So instead of it being in a room for a traction elevator that's up here, or for a hydraulic elevator that's going to be serving one of the lower landings, you have the motor in the shaftway. So what does that mean? It means it's a little bit more difficult to maintain sometimes because the mechanics have to get inside of that build or inside of the shaftway to do maintenance. They can't do anything else in the machine room. They have to be in the shaftway. It can typically take a little bit longer to install these type of units. And then replacement parts are typically can be a little bit more expensive. So these can typically serve mid-rise buildings. You're not going to have really one of these in a skyscraper, but those are the 3 main type of elevators that you primarily see. And then we just have an overview here. And I know this presentation will be shared with everyone, but if you have any questions on the type of equipment that you have, I think it's important to note as we're going through this, it's a good reminder to think, okay, what kind of elevator equipment do I have? And of course, there's different manufacturers for the different type of equipment, but we'll go into life cycles and really what gets you to an elevator mod and why it's important. All right, so with that, I will pass it over to Nick from DTM, and then we'll start off here with the modernization stages.
Yeah. 1 second, please.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, well, we got me in the left corner there or the right corner, depending on how you're looking at it. So welcome, everyone. I just want to jump on 1 or 2 types of equipment that Amber covered very well. Appreciate that, Amber. When you hear about hydraulic elevators and you're on a project or or will be part of a development, and you hear that a hydraulic elevator is going above 6 floors, you may want to start referencing with some expert on that. The concern is we do have what we call telescopic hydraulic elevators that they market to go higher, but the concern there is the limit in basically an efficiency that would cause and reliability. So that's one of the reasons why we're very happy to engage on these seminars to provide this type of level of education, because that's not commonly known, right? So you get from this, hey, they said 6, why is this one going 10 or 11? Maybe I should be asking about that. That brings a level of knowledge that you would not get unless you have experienced that. So keep that in mind on the hydros. Normally you wouldn't see that in an office environment, but just keep it in mind, a little bit of an extra piece of education. Second, on the MRLs, very popular in Europe for many, many years. The United States was always limited about allowing them in. The challenge, as Amber had mentioned, is the maintenance factor. A lot of stuff is in the shaftway, a lot of concerns about safety. We are allowing them in the code committee. I sit on the code committee representing BOMA, so I try to protect your interest and watch at what is being axed or what's being eliminated to make sure it isn't detrimental to the real estate industry itself. So with that being said, they have now changed based on the national code what the requirement is for looking at that elevator when a mechanic first responds. So that code is not applicable right now, but probably will be in the next year or two, based on the code cycle. And what I'm meaning is, as Amber said, a lot of equipment's in the shaft, including the machine that is usually at the top of the shaft in most cases. That machine at the top of the shaft is not accessible presently by the mechanic without having to get into that shaftway. There have been accidents, there have been concerns about levels of maintenance, checking the brakes, so forth and so on. We've adopted a version of a code that is going to require at the top of the shaft, where that machine is located, an access panel so that a mechanic responding could go to that panel to see what the condition is, and also the opportunity for that mechanic under a controlled panel to be able to try and move the car. And this is how we are addressing some of the safety concerns the industry has seen based on accidents, and allowing still a product that many people prefer not be available to be available, because it does have a particularly good place to fit in particularly residential buildings. So again, a little bit additional education on some of the concerns with different types of equipment. So thank you again, everyone, for giving us this opportunity. I look forward to talking through these stages, and hopefully, I believe we'll probably have a little time for Q&A based on you sending comments into the BOMA office. So right here is a little bit whole picture of how this is going to go when you start a mod. Mod is probably one of the, elevators are on the top 4 major components in your buildings, besides heating, air conditioning. You'll see all the surveys put them right up there as critical to your tenants. So modernizations are difficult. They're very costly and very time consuming. The best advice I could give, if you have older equipment, always try to get ahead of a modernization, meaning don't wait until your equipment is constantly breaking down and saying, oh, it's old, we need to modernize. You're going to have a hard modernization program that way. When you base the equipment age, there's industry standards. Years ago, when my father used to write these specifications, it was 30 years. Me being the second generation, I was writing them at about 25. Now my sons and the other family members here writing them closer to 20. Okay, the technology has increased so much. How many of you have computers that are even more than 5 years old? Never mind 20 years old. And an elevator, 90% of it is a high quality, high speed, artificial intelligence type of computer that's running your elevator. So keep that in mind. If you're on a job that has many breakdowns, well, then you have to move a little bit faster, right? How you can control those, is there staging, is there separate components that could be stored on site to minimize the downtime, and then look how that interacts with your modernization program. The last thing you want, you have a car, you have a 4-car bank, you have 1 car out for mod, and you got 2 other cars that are unreliable, besides having to make up moving stuff in and out on that 3rd car. You're in a heck of a lot of trouble for the next couple of years. So keep that in mind. This isn't something that you turn a light switch and you're in a modernization. Okay? So we're going to start site survey specification, bid package. I got to backtrack. Actually, you got to start with your consultant. As I just stated, these projects are very time consuming, very technical, and very expensive. Very expensive. So you do need protection on your end. As a manager and most owners, it's common these days that consultants engage ahead of time to put together the specifications. We'll talk about this step by step, but make sure you have your protection. It's not something you can walk into not being an expert in this area. We'll do bidder interviews, then you have the award, then you have scheduling, permits, team introduction, ownership involvement. So we're gonna go through each one of these, and I'll try and move fast enough so we could have some time to answer some questions. Site survey. So this is where you, as the property manager, senior manager, junior manager, assistant manager, you know your building, okay? The consultant coming in wants that information from you. What are your concerns? What's your history on your calls, right? As the consultant, we need all the key stakeholders involved, and you're the major one. You're gonna be the one that's dealing with the tenants. There'll be interface with us as the consultant and the elevator company with your tenants, but you're gonna be the leading person with that. The logistics of not only the electrical, mechanical, but just the day-to-day of your building, how your building flows. What are the challenges you have already with your building? And now we're gonna compound by taking elevators out of service. We'll be looking at the existing equipment assessment that's thorough to understand what definitely needs to replace, what needs an overhaul, or what could be maintained. Next, you got code compliance. A lot of modernizations are driven by code compliance. As I stated, I advocate for the owners to make sure if they want a new component or a new change in the law, is it necessary? Is it safety driven to protect the public? There's a lot of nice haves that we'd all like to see on all type of equipment, but is it really necessary? Are we making it safer? And that's why we do it, not just because it would be nice to have. And that gets to be a challenge in that committee, as you can imagine. We also have to look at the structural of the building, the mechanical considerations. There's a lot that goes into this initial survey to make sure the end product is what everybody's expectation was, sometimes as long as 4 or 5 years down the road on the bigger buildings. And then we also, what's the improvement in operation am I going to see? How much more efficient am I going to be? And those are these traffic studies we do based on your population, based on square footage. So there's a lot to go into that homework to make sure what we're looking to design meets the criteria that benefits you as the manager and owner down the road. And then, of course, you may be in an older building that'll have environmental issues or site concerns. If you haven't touched the beam since the building's been up, and based on the age, it could be asbestos in that beam. And those are big challenges that we need to know up front to know how we handle them. FYI, a lot of hatch doors in the older buildings had asbestos in their panels. That's the door that's on every floor. So you can imagine, oh my God, do I have to change every door on every floor? No, but there is an authorized procedure to modify those door panels for what we need and be in compliance with all safe handling of an asbestos material. So those are the type of key items we got to be engaged with you on ahead of even writing the specification. And then, of course, we have the specification, which is your contract document on top of other components, such as the invoices, AIA, projections on cost, and of course, number one, for you as a manager or an owner, is the coordination. How bad is this going to be? How are we going to keep me performing, my building performing at first-class standards while this goes on? The specifications, okay, again, modernization specification is going to detail everything that's going to be done, believe it or not, every single thing. And if it's on your part, meaning removing asbestos or upgrading your air conditions, we're going to incorporate that in there under owner's requirements. And then you would have to sub that out to your approved vendor. But we'll make a note that you are in need to upgrade, for instance, your air conditioning, so that you can even get ahead of that before we start the project. And of course, the specification will include a maintenance document. We want the maintenance contract to be part of the specification. We want particulars in there, overtime on your freight car, extended hours each day, so forth and so on. Even qualifications for performance, possibly penalties for non-performance, penalties if they're not meeting a certain criteria, uptime on the equipment. These are KPIs we all hear about every day. I don't need to tell you that in your business, they're prominent. For modernization projects, it's not just a technical document, the spec, it's your control instrument. It's the Bible at that point. It's what you want to have easily available. You want to reference it frequently. Hopefully, you'll understand enough. If not, then you ask your professional to walk you through it. Because a lot of it's going to be done to get it correct with you up front, but then it's a day-to-day while you go through this project. And then you want all this is to make sure the project goes efficiently, safely, and without costly surprises. I can't honestly say that we don't have change orders during these, particularly the major ones, but we try and keep them at a minimum, and many of the times those may come up earlier where we can identify them. If they don't, it's usually to appease a tenant concern or to not upset a tenant. We'll ask to do something on overtime, or could we not be accessing that motor room during these hours? That, if not noted up front, will be a surprise cost to you. We want to get that information from you as we're designing the specifications. Okay, now we finally get through that lengthy process. We sat with you, we think we covered everything. We're pretty comfortable, mechanical, both on the elevator side and your other components, which not only air conditioning, your main line feeds, your access to the motor room, it goes on and on what you need to do. Your fire system coordination, all of that has to be part of this package. Now we go to bid. So you got to evaluate the contract's alignment with, number one, your understanding of where you want to be when this project's done, right? Your needs on the day-to-day basis that you live with from your office every day with your tenants. You want to make sure you understand what the reliability is going to be moving forward, right? Compliance with all the other codes that might be interacting with this modernization, and then risk mitigation. You have to have clear deliverables. That's why the specification is key for you to cover all those components. All the major elevator contractors are on board with, let's all work off the same sheet of paper. I can meet the expectations if I understand them. And it works well together, particularly with the companies you're very familiar with that are in Manhattan, Nouveau being one of them. There should be no surprises during this whole process. And yes, if a tenant or an owner's request comes in midstream that blindsides us, well, we could address it at that point. But again, we're working together as a team, and we understand the challenges and how we have to move forward. And then communication is critical, and the timeline, which I'll touch in a little bit towards the end, is really long lead times for these equipments. Okay, on the bidder interviews, and I always tell, over the years I've been doing this, I always tell the owners, the managers, if it's a co-op board, the owners of the the board members, this is key. The interview is going to be what you're going to get from that company. If the person represent that company is in line with your beliefs, in line with your goals and objectives, and has that mindset that they are critical to being successful here for you, that's what you feel and you want to get in a bid interview. If you're just sitting across someone who you seem like you're bothering, that you had them come to be interviewed for this job, it kind of be related to maybe how they run that operation or how that operation is run. So to me, it's a lot about feelings when you're done with this lengthy day or 2 days, based on how big the project is, of interviewing the elevator contractor vendor. So take away from a bid interview. You want to make sure they understood the scope. They put forth challenges based on their review of your building. In DTM's world, we require that they have a mandatory visit. We don't want them bidding this from their desk. They cannot get the feel for the job. Okay? Special requests at that time should be discussed, right? Tenant and ownership. Who's in your building? Are they financial? Are they a hospital? What's it all mean? Size of the building's got to be taken into account. Obviously, the number of devices drive the whole project, right? Cost-wise, scheduling-wise, your bigger buildings, very complicated laying out. Okay, and then equipment type. What do they like to use? We have a handful of vendors. We prefer generic products so that anytime you're not locked into a specific vendor. So you want to hear from them that, yes, you want to hear a familiar name. When they say we want to use ABC controller, we want to make sure it's the controller that's been familiar, vetted out, and has some level of response from the manufacturer if there's a manufacturer problem, where they are part of the solution not a continuous part of the problem. Staffing on the project. Well, guess what? On a bigger job, you may be living with these people, these ladies and gentlemen, in and out of your building for the next 3 to 4 years. Okay, even if it's 1 year. I don't know if anyone like to be daily dealing with someone they're not comfortable with. You want an account rep that's going to be responsive and be there. You want to know the manager of the modernization. You want to know the site supervisor. That's probably one of the key people too. He's going to be your day-to-day update because you don't want to get information from too many people in this circle. You want it to be accurate or it could get you in trouble when you report back to ownership or your bosses. Supervisory personnel also should be coming from the main office, coming back and forth too to keep an eye on things. And then long-term service maintenance capabilities. Right off the bat, they're going to take over the maintenance. If you award a mod contract to the elevator company that's not in the building now for you, you have a short window to make that change. You want to get the new company in to see how they respond. Well, they do all their surveys. Well, they do all their drawings. Well, they order all their equipment. How they respond to you on the maintenance end, because this is who's you are going to be living with moving forward. And then, of course, on the bigger buildings, there'd be a resident mechanic. That's a mechanic that reports to your job every day, has no other jobs to go to. If you're bigger, you normally see that somewhere when you start getting 25 and up elevators in a building. You got 40, you're definitely probably having a resident. And then there's route mechanics. That's a little bit of a challenge when you get into a mod. That should be discussed up front. That should possibly be covered a little bit more detailed in the spec on what the hours we're mandating. We want that route mechanic to be there doing preventive maintenance, particularly ahead of a modernization. And you could say, all right, why would I want to worry about what he's doing ahead when I'm ripping this stuff out? Well, that older stuff has to run until that new car comes back in. So we want to make sure we're doing maintenance to keep the cars as reliable as possible. You're going to be down an elevator in a bank or multi-elevators if you're a multi-bank building where we'll have a team in each bank doing one elevator at a time. You don't want those other cars shutting down. The route mechanic needs his time in the building to help avoid shutdowns. So that's got to be specifically built in. And now one of the parts a lot of people are not aware about, scheduling. Unless you've entered into an HVAC project, or actually you would, a lot of you I'm sure have seen build outs happen for tenants, white boxing and build out. That's a lot of time it takes. Our average longest piece of equipment could be an elevator machine if it's going to be brand new, and sometimes the elevator fixtures, the buttons in the car. Those two components could take up to 20 weeks to be fabricated. So just think about that. That's 20 weeks for that product to get to your building. That doesn't account the approval and design in the first place. All right. So we need to be well ahead of the scheduling. On the consultant's end, I'm going to jump back. That's not on this slide. On the consultant's end, all right, you're approved in your budget to have an elevator modernization done in your building. I want to get started. Let me interview consultants. All right. Any consultant at average is going to need about 3 months to have you before your bid is on the street for bidding. Okay, we got to come in, do the site survey, as I mentioned some of the details before. We got to write the specification. We got to meet with you on the specification and modify it. There may be times where if you have an architect involved, we're already engaging with the architect on the elevator cab interior design. All of this has to be designed, reviewed, and approved by ownership ahead of that specification package being put on the street for the bidders. Slightly ahead of that, you could start shortlisting who you would like on the elevator contractor side from your familiarity with the company or other project or property managers that have said they've been successful, to start thinking about who you're going to bid the elevator portion to once you pick your consultant. So 3 months before you actually even award, and then you could be looking at an award between contracts and this lead time. You could be, 30, 40 weeks out before someone's going to put a hammer to the first car that you're starting. So just key takeaways: understanding lead times, Permits are a big factor. We could start those pretty early. Establish your working hours in the building. Sometimes there's tenants that don't want to hear anything first thing in the morning. Constant communication with your tenants. We've gone as far as having, in the old days, billboards in the lobby with the update on the project schedule and pictures of components being replaced to help keep that knowledge and then in as part of a team member to be successful for the project. Okay, milestone trackings, there's always buffer time. We're not gonna put a new car right in. We're gonna let it run in for a day or so, maybe over the weekend. If it doesn't fail, then we move on to the next car. And progress visits by your consultant is key. We gotta be on the same page with the elevator contractor, particularly while we're reviewing their invoices. Amber's had a couple of conversations with me over the years, but we don't want to approve unless we visually know that that stage is done and they're entitled to it. Sometimes it's back and forth. Sometimes they're behind and we'll bring them up. Sometimes they're ahead and we'll pull them back. All right, permits and submittals. Okay, elevator alteration permit, DOB now, we all know that process. There's some challenges inherited in there. License applications, licensed workforce, tenant notifications in some cases, particularly residential buildings. Other requirements are required there too. And then testing and inspections, right? Right now, you may be aware BOMA was a key player in getting the building department to allow third-party licensed inspectors like DTM to do acceptance tests. The reasoning there was 3 to 4 months for a date from the DOB was unacceptable for you guys running a building, having a project that needs to be signed off, or you receive penalties or delays, a whole bunch of reasons. They did work successfully with us, and it's still in process. It is bookmarked to end at the end of this year. There is conversations going through BOMA again, and some other organizations to ask if that will be extended. They have not corrected their problem. Their problem is lack of personnel to do the inspections. So until they do, we hope they keep this in place so we could be part of the solution, not part of the problem waiting around for inspections to happen. Submittals are key. Many times it's the layout drawings that you're counting on your professional to be alert, review, stamp approved, or bring anything that's abnormal to your attention. But we would not expect you as a building property manager to be able to sit and pick out the elevator motorroom concerns, right? We got to get those to you in a condition that we could say, sit with you, show you what we went through, show you what our concerns are, show us what our modifications are, and then have that stamped approved. Drawings and catalog data, you need all of this information. You want to be able to turn around if your ownership asks you, oh, I went by building ABC, it had this nice kind of sign in the elevator cab that was showing ads. You know, is that what we're getting? You know, all these type of things, very, very technical. You want to have all that documentation for yourself that you're available to answer those questions, or at least reference through your consultant. Yes, here's the drawing. This is what we are giving you. Then there's plot plans needed. That's what the city wants. They have to be stamped by a PE before they'll allow them. And that's the last item, is the seal that the PE has to put on. Those drawings are done by the elevator contractor. If the consultant's drawing something different, if you're modifying your motorroom or your architect's drawing something different, they will all need to be filed under that stamp from the elevator contractor as one package for the elevator project. Okay, how do you know your team? So team introductions, and you got to get to know your new team. Again, I'm going to revisit the project manager. That's the person that's going to be off-site, but the one you want to go to. That project manager is responsible for his company's office end of the project and the field end of the project. If there's difficulties on either one of those ends, they're the means and methods to get it corrected or addressed. They'll be your main point of contact, and they'll coordinate with the consultant, the DOB, and ownership. The superintendent and foreman, also mentioned earlier, they're critical to your relationship and success because they're on the site every day. Now, again, they have limited qualifications to engage with you. they shouldn't be making commitments they're not supposed to make. That should come from your project manager, or possibly if it's more on the management end, your account rep. But they're the ones that are gonna say, hey, everything went well today, we're moving along, but tomorrow we're gonna be on the 33rd floor by that motor room. That was on the schedule. I just wanted to know, make sure you knew that so you could, re-refresh the tenant's, mind that tomorrow he's gonna see us out around that room. Those are the kind of things that the day-to-day person is gonna give you as your site foreman or your site manager, superintendent, for less of a better word. And then who are your field mechanics and your installation team, right? You want guys that respect the building, that cooperate, but obviously they shouldn't be engaging with your tenants. They should be polite. If they're being asked questions, I always say, just ask them to please talk to the manager. Okay, it's, that's not my job, I'm sorry, but, please talk to the manager, and whatever they need, my company will provide the information for you. So many of these guys are seasoned, if not the younger ones are learning from the older mechanics, that it's, the days of, laughing, music playing, not dressed in the uniform properly or look presentable. Those days, thank God, are gradually disappearing. Doesn't mean you might not get a one-off personnel on the site, but at that point, a decision could be made to ask for a change of personnel. We do not like doing that because most of these people are working as a team, but that team would be moved off the job, and that would leave a little bit of unknown on the progress that's been happening on that particular stage of the job. Even though the foreman's there, he could step in, or even the project manager would know. But we always like, right out of the gate, if you're uncomfortable, there's no better time than then to say, I don't know, that person just, I don't feel right is right for my fit in my building. That's all it has to be. Personalities aside, if you're not comfortable, please address it up front. It's your building. It's going to be your project. It's going to be your responsibility to answer to your tenants, your owner. You should not be uncomfortable with who is performing the work from you on any aspect of the site, on your building, your HVAC, your consultants, or particularly your mechanics that are on site for a lengthy or any time for modernization. And by the way, the shortest time in mods for commercial buildings is probably about 15 weeks in elevator that they're there once they start. So just keep this in mind. This isn't, oh, they'll be done right away. I'll put up with it. There's no putting up with it. They're living there for a while. All right, consultants, you want to be comfortable with your consultant. They're your main protection. They're your expert to design what your vision is, what your goals and objectives are. But they're the one you're going to say, hey, I saw Amber and she was putting this piece of equipment. I didn't know we were getting that. You want to go, hey, Nick, oh yeah, she's just bringing that new component in because, it just came in a little late, so she's getting into the job. It's something she's going to make sure the mechanic does right away. So you want your engagement with your consultant. You want to be comfortable with them. You want to make sure they're meeting their commitment on what they had put in their proposal to you, particularly about visits to the job, documentation on what's expected, review of the invoicing, punching out of the equipment, and ultimately getting your closeout package and bird dogging the closing out of permits. Two ways the permits are closed out. One are in the elevator division for the actual elevator equipment, and the other is in the electrical department at DOB for the main lines and the feeders to that equipment, and or anything in the motor room, lighting, outlets, GFI outlets in the pit, so forth and so on. So your project's really not over until those permits are closed. Because if they're not, and you try to do something else on that building, it may hamper the availability for you to move forward on a different or next project. Okay, involvement, stay engaged. No matter how many professionals you have, no matter what's the best elevator company in the world. Oh, that's where I was going to have Amber jump in and say, Naveau, but she missed that. Sorry. You are responsible. Your ownership is going to look at you because you're their protection on that job. They understand, no one's naive, these are complicated projects. Probably one of the most complicated you'll be doing. All right, so I'm sure they understand you're not the expert. But knowing what to look out for will help you do your job better. Knowing who you should communicate with will help you get things done faster. Very simple. I'm proud to say the majority of the jobs, we have great working teams. We work great with ownership. Operations, we work great with the elevator contract. We love to address a problem together immediately so it doesn't become an issue to your ownership. And that's all about the team feel, the commitment by each party, and stepping up to your work and getting it done for you. So takeaways, rely on your consultant for oversight and guidance. And I always say, and I used to say when I give these in person, you know, there's no stupid questions, there's only stupid answers, and I can give them. But don't be afraid to ask. We understand that you don't know everything I know on elevators, and I sure don't know just about anything about you running the day-to-day of your building and what you're up against too. So don't be afraid to ask. No one should be embarrassed to get an answer. And it could be the simplest or easiest answer, but ask it. Don't be afraid to. Next, ensure the DOB requirements are met. We will bird dog that, but the elevator contractor might miss a beat. I might miss a beat. So that conversation should be part of the updates. Hey, are all our permits in? Show me. We make sure they're circulated when they come in. This way, everybody has it in a folder. Any questions by ownership, any question by an inspector walking on, here's the package for the elevators, here's all the permits. Keep your tenants up to date, keep them happy. Well, I think, you know, you guys know that every day you're trying to do that. That could be a challenge. But I found that the jobs we get in trouble is where we're not communicating enough. Even if it's bad news, we word it properly, we present it correctly. It's still at least giving them some knowledge on what's going on instead of them just being aggravated and it festered within them until they fire off a bullet to your owner about how they, you know, they're unhappy. So we're gonna have times you're unhappy. It's big projects, these elevator jobs. Let's work together collectively to make it right as fast as possible. And then keeping detailed records, all the documents. You should be getting a ton of information in. Some of it should be able to be disregarded, but the majority of it, you want to have your folder. You want to keep your progress minutes. Those are great protection for you if someone questions something now or down the road. Hey, on, you know, in the month of May on the project update, this is what had happened. So I don't think, you know, the tenant's right that they say this happened then, or, you know, yes, it is correct. That kind of documentation is critical for you to have in your day-to-day binder, because there is going to feel that sometimes it's overwhelming. And sometimes you just need to put it in there and know that you can reference it, but not have to really spend a lot of time on it, right? So I know I talked a little bit fast, but this gives us about 15 minutes. I believe we're going to go to some questions, aren't we? And thank you, everyone, for your time.
Yes, thank you so much. So with that, I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, guys. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to come off of mute or you can drop them in the chat.
Now, we couldn't have done this too good a job. I'm sure someone's out there.
My questions is if you are in an older building that doesn't necessarily have, you know, proprietary technology, and you're thinking that you might need a mod, obviously you're going to have a consultant come in, they're going to evaluate everything, but you know, is going to this kind of proprietary technology, is there a way out of it, or is that is just what's going to happen?
No. As I mentioned in one part of this, the equipment, particularly most of the consultants are recommending, are generic brands. These controllers out of California, there's other places around the country, and they'll sell to anyone. Proprietary equipment and the big manufacturers, you know the names, all the big names that are on many of your jobs, they hate that word. But in reality, there is a proprietary version of that. And I'll make it very simple for you. Even if you're using one of the big OEMs, at some point, no matter what they could provide to you, if you move away from them down the road, say everything's fine and you just have to by policy, bid out every 5 years, and it winds up their numbers not fair or whatever, and not in line with what the expectations are, and you bid out, they by law have to provide certain things that should be documented in your specification. One of those things would be a working tool to do diagnostic on your controllers in your building that you would have to sign a licensing agreement to have. And that just says you will not have that used anywhere else. So they'll tell you we're not proprietary because we will give you what you need to maintain your equipment. That's the word. The key word is maintain, right? And in many cases, they are right for the job. And if they do good, I'm here on 120 Broadway. I'm lucky enough to be a tenant here and dealing with Silverstein since we started the business. Otis has built this building in the early 1900s and is still in here. So there's a benefit to what they bring. The end of the day, software is the issue, intellectual property is the issue. So any elevator company cannot illegally obtain a troubleshooting tool and then bring it onto your job site. Any elevator company, probably on these higher proprietary components, can't go in and copy software. So that's the real difference when you talk about priority of proprietary. But the Novos and the most independents, they're going to put a non-generic, they're going to put a generic controller dispatcher in that you could go to the manufacturer, either through you or through a new elevator company, and say, I need these components, I need this software changed. It's really the software that gets to be really tricky down the road. But most of the independents are using generic, if not all, generic components. And that was a great question.
Yes.
Everybody's shy out there, come on.
Any other questions?
I'll leave one more question out there. Elevator cabs. If I have to pick one component that gives us the most aggravation, it's elevator cabs. Okay, and let me just talk to that, because if any of you are in a mod, going into a mod, it's critical. It's critical that you have that design done as early as possible, even ahead of you, ready to award to either a consultant and or an elevator company. That component is another very long lead time. And to get an agreement, and particularly if they're not using an architect that they're familiar with, who's done elevators for them before, will be very cumbersome and long on your side with your owners. It's great with big owners that have the architect they always use that knows what they like. It's terrible if you're with an owner that hasn't had that experience before to get through that process. And no one wins. It's like telling, it's like asking someone, what furniture or what they want to paint in their apartment. It's very personal to these owners. So keep that in mind as a side note.
Yeah, and with the elevator cabs also, you always want to look ahead. Is there an upcoming lobby renovation project that's going to be within 5 years? And then is the design going to change in the lobby, and you want the elevator cabs to match in a way? So it's important to also keep that into consideration looking down the road as you're making any changes.
All right. Well, thank you, Amber. Thank you, Nick, so much for today's presentation. I'll be sure to share this with everyone on the call and those who were unable to join. If you guys do have any questions that you think of after the fact, you guys will have their information. So feel free to reach out to both Amber and Nick with any additional questions that you may have. And yes, I will be sending out the slides as well as a recording of the presentation.
Well,
Perfect.
thank you, everyone. Appreciate it, Amber. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Good to see you, Nick.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good to see you,
Take care.
Amber.
You
Nice
too.